Good evening. My name is Chip Gibbons. I'm the Policy Director of Defending Rights and Dissent. It's 5:01 in Washington, D.C., where I normally am, and it is 10:01 in London, where I am tonight, because for the last 2 days, I've been covering what could be Julian Assange's final appeal for Jacobin magazine, one of the leading publications of the U.S. left. I thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to talk about what happened today on day 2 of what could be Julian Assange's final appeal. First, I just want to talk about how inspiring the protest and support for Assange in London has been. I mentioned yesterday I got to the courthouse about 8:30, even though the proceedings started at 10:30 because I wasn't sure if there'd be problems with my press credentials or whatnot. And there were thousands of people outside the courthouse. Today, and when I left, there were hundreds, if not thousands, outside the courthouse. And when Stella Assange and the WikiLeaks team came out, they all chanted, "There's only one decision, no extradition, free Assange," and applauded. And today when I got there, it was pouring rain, so there were only hundreds. But when I left, there were again thousands. And they also, you had to walk through the protesters with police on both sides, I guess, to save me from the pro-Julian Assange protesters. Not that I needed saving from that crowd. And when Stella Assange and Gabrielle and John Shipton and the WikiLeaks team came out and the defense came out, huge applause for them. And then there was a very spirited march that I covered as a reporter. I took some photos of it and put some videos on Twitter. Not very good videos. I'm not a very good live streamer. Do not worry, I'm not giving up my career as a writer to become a live streamer of marches. I will leave that to people who can, figure out the switch sides on the camera button. But it's been really inspiring. It reminds me of the march we saw on the eve of Chelsea Manning's court-martial that I was at. I don't even know how many years ago. It's been too long of a day to do math. Where there were thousands of people, and we took Nobel Peace Prizes because Obama, you may remember, got one and then dropped a bunch of bombs with drones. And we hung them on the gates of Fort Meade, arguing that Obama, symbolically arguing, of course, that Obama should give his Nobel Peace Prize to Chelsea Manning. And it reminded me of that level of energy and spirit. There's been incredible speakers from left-wing parliamentarians from around the world to more mainstream human rights groups. It's an incredible show of support for press freedom and for Julian Assange we've seen in London. And I hope that when I come back to the United States, we can see a similar level, perhaps. So if you watched yesterday's broadcast or have just seen my tweets or read Kevin Gustola's, I shouldn't be drinking wine on a live stream, or watch Kevin Gustola's excellent article. It's 10 o'clock here in London. It's been a very long day. And my throat's starting to hurt. If you read Kevin Gustola's excellent article, you will know there's been tremendous problems with press access. All of the international journalists who are not in England and Wales were denied press access, remote access, which meant I had to do something I love doing, going to an airport. I love being in places. I love being in London. I love traveling. I just really don't like going to an airport and getting on a plane. It's not my favorite experience. And come and cover it in person. And we didn't even know until 2 days before if we would even get if we would even get credentials, which made planning flights and stuff very, very difficult. So yesterday, for those of the press like myself who were assigned to the annex overflow room, traditionally in this courthouse, when you're a member of the press and you're assigned the annex room, there's a lower level where there are desks and chargers, and you work at the desk and you charge your computer and you can live tweet and all those kinds of things. And there's a TV and you watch it on it. The judge ruled that the journalists could not sit at the desk and had to sit up in this balcony where there's no desk, there's no chargers, and you really can't see or hear anything. And it makes zero sense. I'm glad members of the public were there, but why they were on their laptops using the chargers, charging their phones for the desks that are usually for working journalists who have, again, I don't begrudge the public. I'm glad they're there, have a greater need for this sort of thing. I don't really know. And then I come back today, and there's huge audio issues yesterday and as well. And I come back today, and And I tried to get in the lower level, and they stopped me and say, "No, you're press. No press down here." I tried multiple times to get in the desk. No press down here. Orders of the judge. So then I'm banished. I'm banished up to the balcony, and then they give this announcement, and no one can hear it in the balcony. So the guy comes up to give it to us, and they say, "We know there were audio issues yesterday. There's likely to be audio issues again today." Real great start to the proceeding. And then the live stream starts, or the remote stream starts, and the judge, who's clear and audible, addresses the fact that there were difficulties, saying they're trying to be transparent and they're hoping they've all been resolved. And the UK prosecutor who's representing the US starts talking, and you can't hear a single word of it. And they actually have to stop the proceeding because the access is so bad. And they fix her mic, I guess. So this is where we're at on day 2, year 5 of this proceeding, right? This is what the level of press access is like. Most of the hearing this time was audible, but huge parts of it were not. It is troubling. Today, the U.S. went and they started off by making these arguments that Julian Assange is not a journalist, Chelsea Manning is not a whistleblower, that Julian Assange is not a journalist because he solicited. They love using this word solicited through WikiLeaks, people to give information that they weren't supposed to. Because whistleblowers famously get the permission of the person they're blowing the whistle on before doing so. And if they don't, then they're not a journalist. And they kept describing Chelsea Manning as stealing documents. He solicited Chelsea Manning to steal documents so they could publish them. And it is presenting WikiLeaks and Assange in the worst possible light. And even then, it really wasn't very persuasive, right? You can keep throwing out these legal terms like solicit, stolen. But at the end of the day, what they described was running a news website and publishing news based on a whistleblower. And it's not clear to me why, under the European Court of Human Rights Standards, they didn't think Chelsea Manning would be a whistleblower. But a huge part of it seemed to just be the fact that she gave out national defense information, which would seem to indicate the prosecution does not believe, national defense information can ever be in the public interest. They kept claiming they were going to make a big deal of the hacking charge or conspiracy to hack charge against Julian Assange, but they didn't focus much beyond the password hashing allegation, where they alleged that Chelsea Manning asked Julian Assange, we don't even know if she was talking to Julian Assange, to help her crack a password hash so she could log on to a computer she already was on to get access to documents she already had access to, but without using her account. And the prosecutor said if she had succeeded, or if they had succeeded in doing this, so essentially acknowledging this alleged plot didn't even work or didn't even come to fruition, it would have been hard for investigators to find out who she was. So again, I'm not personally feeling very persuaded by the prosecution here. The other really interesting, what else was interesting today? The other interesting thing that we heard was that there was some discussion about the death penalty, and the prosecution really shot themselves in the foot on this issue, because the defense has argued there's no death penalty assurance and that the charges could be reworked to support different charges that carry the death penalty. I understand why the defense is making that argument. And if I was his defense in a UK court, I would make it too. I think there's a very low chance that would ever happen, given the way that the parts of the Espionage Act that do carry the death penalty. But the prosecution just shot themselves in the foot with this one. I mean, I'm reading from Free Assange News, which I think covered this verbatim. Justice Johnson, if the appellate is extradited to these charges, do you accept those charges could carry the death penalty? In principle, yes. Is there anything that can be done to prevent a death penalty being imposed? It would be very difficult to offer assurances to prevent the death penalty from being imposed. But that still doesn't mean the Secretary of State was wrong in refusing to prevent extradition. The UK will not extradite you if you can face the death penalty. So that remark alone is really shocking, and probably in a rational world would sink this extradition, even though it's an extremely remote possibility. And the prosecution just totally flubbed that one. I was actually surprised they were so incompetent. The other thing we heard again and again was that there was no political nature to these charges, and they kept relying on the declarations of Gordon Cromberg. Gordon Cromberg is the prosecutor in the U.S. in this case. He prosecuted Daniel Hale and compared him to a heroin dealer. He also prosecuted a number of Muslim Americans and has been accused of all kinds of racial and religious insensitivities and bringing politically biased cases. There's a very good piece on his career in The Intercept, except that it neglects the Daniel Hale stuff. So this is not someone I would consider reliable. And they're like, well, there's no press freedom issue here because Gordon Cromberg said in a declaration he doesn't consider Julian Assange a journalist. It's like, oh, I feel so convinced right now that Gordon Cromberg, a man who's been continuously accused of political bias in investigations, who compared Daniel Hale, the drone whistleblower, to a heroin addict, says he personally doesn't think Julian Assange is a journalist. Therefore, this isn't a prosecution of a journalist. Cromberg also raised the possibility that the U.S. could argue that Julian Assange, as a foreign national, has no First Amendment rights, which has led the defense for Assange to argue that the extradition should be blocked because he would face prejudice as a foreign national. Let's just stop for a minute and remember, they're saying the Espionage Act applies to anyone anywhere in the world, but then if they bring them here, they don't have the same defenses that Americans would have. It's quite you get one or the other. I feel like either the First Amendment doesn't apply to Julian Assange and the Espionage Act doesn't apply, or, you would have to do that. And the judges seemed most skeptical of the prosecution's claims here that this wouldn't be prejudicial against Mr. Assange as a foreign national. Finally, there was a lot of discussion about the political offenses doctrine, which is U.S.-UK extradition law treaty forbids the extradition of someone based on a political offense, but the 2003 UK extradition law does not mention it. And the prosecution has argued that that was deliberate, that it's an outdated concept. They quoted some sort of law lord or a lord of some sort from 2003 who called the political, not from 2003, 1986, who called the political offense exception extradition Western European and North American liberal ideals that no longer are relevant to the modern world. Western European and North American liberal ideals. This is a US-UK extradition treaty. And I am very, the courts, the judges spent a lot of time drilling in on the claims that Julian Assange revealed human sources yesterday. So I was a little bit concerned, but when the prosecution brought that claim up again, the judges point blank asked them, Assange claims he didn't cause them to be revealed, which is true. A third party sort of published a password and then they were inadvertently leaked. It's a convoluted story and I'm not going to go into it. And I was impressed that the judges brought that up. The prosecution was just like, it's not relevant. He was, responsible for the chain of events in which this happened. And the judges also seemed really skeptical of the prosecution on a number of other points. So I am slightly optimistic. I do think some of the legal arguments being presented by the prosecution go way too far, that even somebody who would be happy with sending Julian Assange to the United States, I don't think they want to throw out 100 years of I would hope not. They would want to throw out 100 years of extradition law. So that's what happened in court today. The U.S. and then the Assange's defense attorneys got to give a rebuttal, and it was an extremely powerful rebuttal because they mentioned that the prosecution spoke for 2.5 hours and not once mentioned that these were revelations about state criminality, about war crimes, that they presented for 2.5 hours without ever once talking about the content of what was released. And that when you are being prosecuted for releasing information about state criminality, and apparently the European Court of Human Rights has said information about state criminality is information with the most public interest. The nexus between that prosecution and the political nature of it is clear. The prosecution also made an argument that it couldn't be a political prosecution because administrations have changed and the prosecution is still afoot. I mean, that's, and then as the defense pointed out that, the intelligence services are pushing this. So that is a political prosecution. So that's where we're at on day 2. The judges did not make a decision. We are awaiting what they're going to decide. It was an interesting day in court. Again, the media faced huge hurdles to covering this case. And the prosecution laid out their case, and we'll see what the judges think. It's difficult to be optimistic at this point, given how many times justice has been perverted to go after Julian Assange. But I do think that Assange's lawyers, I guess they're no longer the defense of the appellants, had the stronger arguments. And I'm not just saying that as somebody who wants them to prevail. I do want them to prevail, but I do truly believe they had the stronger legal arguments, and that I hope the UK courts come to their senses. I hope someone somewhere comes to their senses, whether it's Biden or the UK courts or the Strasbourg courts, or God help us, the court in Alexandria, Virginia, and just halts this, because this is the death of the First Amendment. This is the death of press freedom globally if this goes through. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. That's all I have to say. I'll be giving future reports and interviews, and I will be writing an article for Jacobin about what I witnessed and experienced here in London.